Okay, so women have come up as a 20 marker. Well, Dido's come up as a 20 marker before for the Aeneid, but they, as a 30 marker, women haven't yet come up. And so I think it's likely, possible, probable, and also quite favourable if it were to come up in the exam this year. That sort of falls into two of the categories that's on the OCR specification. So obviously the relationship between men and women, and also the part played by women in the epic and their position in society. So you want to think about it in terms of how the women are portrayed, what does that tell us about Roman society as well? Remember, this is a really interesting time within Roman society because Augustus is legislating morality, essentially, legislating sexuality. We have on the one hand people like Ovid writing poems about how he's just screwing around Rome and how every single woman wants a piece of him. And then we have Augustus who's banishing members of his family for being adulterers. And we've also got the sort of ghost of the worst woman that we could possibly think of, aka Cleopatra, this Egyptian woman who seduced, supposedly, both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And this sort of woman, she represents this foreign woman who is able to take down the empire by getting in on men's one weakness, which is their sort of sexual desire and their sexual virility. So people are very suspicious of women in ancient Rome, essentially. They want women to be well-behaved, quiet, and when they meet up separately, for instance, there was also the Bonadea scandal about 40 years before the publication of this poem, where women were meeting up for religious purposes, and men were getting so suspicious, and a man called Clodius dressed up as a woman in order to infiltrate these religious meetings because they were so suspicious that why are women meeting up? Why are they uncontrolled? All of this sort of thing. So it's very much that women are a threat to male stability. So let's have a think. Who are the mortal women? I'm focusing on the mortal women. Your essay should say whether it wants you to talk about mortal women or women and goddesses. Who are the mortal women? First one that everyone always focuses on is Dido. Please, if you get a women essay, do not write just your essay on Dido. Give her a good paragraph. She's worth talking about, but don't make your entire essay Dido. Then obviously with Dido we have Anna and Creusa, Aeneas' first wife, of course. We meet in book 2 and then is never mentioned again. Also in book 2 we get to see Helen. We get a quick glimpse of Helen in book 2 when Aeneas thinks about killing her. We also hear about Helen from Daphoebe in book 6, where he sort of says that she was a conniving little bitch, essentially, and plotted in order to kill him. And that's how he's ended up mutilated in the underworld. So she gets a really bad rap in the Aeneid. We get this collective of Trojan women as well, who follow Aeneas out of Troy and get abandoned in book 5. Well, they don't get abandoned, they ask to stay in book 5 with the Kestes. We get the Sibyl, the priestess that guides Aeneas down to the underworld in book 6. We then in book 7 get introduced to Lavinia, the most boring person that's ever been written about. And of course her mum, Amata. And along with Lavinia and Amata, we get the Latin women as a collective as well. Remember, the Latin women, they get turned into, they sort of follow Amata's, are infected by Amata's craziness, her furor as well. And then they end up leaving the city. So they clear out the city. So the reason that I bolded the Trojan women, the Latin women there, they're sort of representative of the collective. And at both instances, so in book 5 for the Trojan women, in book 7 for the Latin women, they're gotten rid of. They're pushed to one side so that they're sort of out of the narrative. And that's an interesting way to think about the collective at this point, that they are sort of separated and removed from the main narrative here. This is clearly going to be a man's story, and the women are just going to be sort of pushed off to one side. We also get Euryalus' mum in book 9. Remember, the important thing about Euryalus' mother, not given a name. Her entire identity, her entire name, in fact, is just mother. And so that shows us sort of the, I guess, one-dimensional side to her character. She is simply just a mother, and that is the only thing that we need to know about her. One of the best characters, of course, is Camilla. We get introduced to her at the end of book 7, and then, of course, she dies at the end of book 11. And then I put Juturna there as a last one, just because Juturna obviously isn't a mortal woman currently in the narrative of the poem, but she used to be. She used to be a mortal woman, and she was raped, and then as a sort of apology for her rape by Zeus, was granted her immortality. So she's changed into an immortal person, but only because almost of her femininity and of her status as a woman, in which she was sort of taken advantage of. And so I've put her there because I think she's worth talking about as well. There are probably lots of others that I've just not remembered. These are the ones that I've remembered off the top of my head and that I think that you would want to talk about in an essay. You won't have time to talk about all of them, but remember, with a 30 marker, you're just trying to shove in as much AO1 as possible, so as much knowledge as possible. So if it comes down to the, in a paragraph that you are putting in brackets and listing several different examples, they're all going to get you ticks and they're all going to get you marks as long as it's accurate information. Shoving it in there and building up your case. Remember, you're almost like a lawyer when you're writing this essay. The more evidence that you've got, the more convincing that your argument is going to be. And so trying to include all of these women, at least briefly in passing, will certainly boost up that AO1 score. So the one that everyone always wants to write about is Dido. Remember, book 1, book 4, and book 6 is where we primarily see her. Like I said, if you get a women essay, write a paragraph on her. Please don't let her dominate your entire essay. Or you could involve her in each paragraph, but sort of more briefly if you're going at it thematically rather than character by character. I'm just going to recap some key parts about Dido that some people forget or forget to pay attention to. A common mistake that people make in the essay is they get confused about what she did before and after she went crazy. So sort of whether she's to blame and is responsible for her actions. Remember that she is a respectable and respectful person before the gods get involved. So we see this in book 1, that she, when Venus tells Aeneas everything that Dido's managed to do, and she summarizes this by saying the woman led the whole undertaking. So she took away she sort of dealt with the death of her husband. She ran away from her brother. She managed to lead all the refugees. She managed to negotiate herself some land. She managed to set up the laws. Remember, that first time we see her, she's dealing out the laws fairly. She's assigning tasks to everyone fairly. And she's doing all of this from the Temple of Juno, which shows us that she is pious as well. So she's religious. She's heard of Aeneas. She's educated and she's aware of sort of the cultural events. She's an incredible woman. And this is what she laments in her final speech to Aeneas as well in book 4, where she sort of says, I had everything. I had my reputation. I had my good name. I had my only hope of my name reaching the stars. She almost wants what men want as well. She wants that kleos. She wants that fame. She wants her name to reach the stars. She can't do that through fighting because she's a woman. So she did it in another way. And the gods have destroyed that. And we're going to get back to how the gods are involved as well with women in just a second. Remember as well, she's politically vulnerable. So she's got all of the African tribes around her that have been threatening to invade, and she's rejected them and said that she's still married to her husband, so she can't sleep with them, and yet she sleeps with Aeneas. That annoys lots of the African tribes around her, mainly Iarbas, Iarbas, Iarbas. Her brother is still wanting to get to her as well and sort of seek his revenge. So she's politically very vulnerable and volatile. And we see this because they're warmongering people, as they're introduced at the very start of book 1. And also we get from Idomeneus, when he gets there, that he says, oh, I got attacked by all of your guards. What's going on? Why is everyone so mean to me? She says, look, I have to have guards. I'm a new nation. We have to have guards around us to protect ourselves. In that sense, she's also socially vulnerable as well, because she's unmarried. She doesn't have sort of an established population. She doesn't have an established city. So she's both politically and socially vulnerable. And at this point, when Aeneas leaves her, this is what she laments in her speech to Aeneas, is that she's been shown to be weak for a man, and she's been shown to give up everything for a man. Her city, the walls cease to rise when she starts sleeping with Aeneas because she goes crazy. And that's what she realizes when Aeneas leaves, is that she can't go with Aeneas. Aeneas's people hate her. She can't take her people with them. She's already uprooted them once before. She doesn't want to stay there because she's lost their respect. And so once Aeneas leaves, she's in such a horrible, volatile, vulnerable position that suicide is the only option for her as she sees it. Be compassionate, please, with your treatment of Dido, especially when it comes to the fact that she ends up choosing suicide, because for her in that moment, within the context socially and politically, She really has sort of burnt all of her bridges at that point. But of course, she's not necessarily this victim, because her final sort of action in book 4 is to curse the line of the Romans and the Carthaginians, and that will result in the Punic Wars. And she says that their sons will stand shoulder to shoulder, war against war, sea against sea, forever and ever. And so she is that curse. We're going to get to that in just a second as well. Be aware that when she goes crazy, she's compared to a bacchant. She's like a Maenad running around the city. She's ranting and raving around the city, and that's important as well. Remember, bacchants are this solely female cult almost, and they were treated with so much suspicion. It's this idea that women give into their furor, their hysteria, and they go crazy in the forests. And it is that sort of, it's a very misogynistic trope within Virgil's world and within the Roman world, that women are susceptible to becoming bacchants and susceptible to almost sort of losing their minds. And that's what happens if we let women gather together without sort of proper male supervision. And then, while she is only in books 1, 4, and 6, she actually haunts throughout the poem. And that's sort of a sign that, you know, she will haunt all the way up until the Punic Wars. We see that she's reflected in Cleopatra. Cleopatra, remember, is on the shield in book 8. That they have very much the similar description. In fact, the same word is used to describe them, pale with the same phrase, pale with the pallor of approaching death, when both of them are approaching their death. So we get this link between Dido and Cleopatra. Remember, they're both sexy, seductive, foreign African women. Pallas's body is wrapped with Dido's sheets that she gave to Aeneas as a gift offering. These purple sheets woven with gold. They're very opulent, they're very rich, and Aeneas uses them to wrap Pallas's body in. This is to show that both Dido and Pallas are collateral damage. Remember, in book 1, at the start of the poem, Virgil says, "So heavy was the cost of founding the Roman race." And Dido and Pallas are two of those people that paid the price. They are part of that cost. And so they are also inextricably linked together. We see it with the Latin women when they're described as bacchants. When they leave the city, they're described as bacchants as well. And obviously we see it with a martyr. With a martyr, she kills herself. Again, somebody who is so unable to bear her hysteria, her furor, that the only option for her is death as well. So we get her, Dido, echoing throughout the poem. She doesn't just get left behind in book 6. We know that Dido and Aeneas are going to be in this sort of forever, this eternal power struggle, this eternal link between the two of them. And Dido will continue to impact the Roman people all the way up until the Punic Wars. In terms of scholarship, you've got lots of scholarship with Dido. So Nellis is your key guy always. So he says that Romans would see the Dido as an active cause of strife, not its tragic victim. So whereas a modern audience tends to be quite sympathetic towards Dido, Nellis argues that Romans would not be, that they would see her as a Cleopatra, and as somebody that caused those Punic Wars. And so they would have a very negative view of Dido. We also get Ingo Gildenhard. Remember, he says that, so Penthesilea, we see she's the leader of the Amazons. She is on Dido's temple, the temple to Juno. She is on Dido's temple. Remember, Aeneas is looking at the temple, looking at the story of the Trojan War. He sees Penthesilea, and as he sees Penthesilea, Dido enters. And so we make this link between Penthesilea and Dido. Camilla is also compared to an Amazonian, so she makes that link between Camilla and Penthesilea. Camilla and Dido are obviously inextricably linked as well, because they both sort of end up opposing Aeneas. And then Cleopatra gets thrown in there as a sort of historical example as well, linking all three of them as these sort of these women that destabilize the male role, really. But they are doomed. It's important that Virgil essentially takes all 4 of these women and makes a point to kill them off in his poem. He is saying, you can be all of those things, but it won't work out well for you. This is not the way to be. It might seem admirable from our modern point of view, but Virgil is making it very clear that these people will not survive in this world. Jenkins calls Dido Virgil's most complex character. You could use that quite openly in terms of your scholarship. And then finally, we get this quote that I'm going to zoom in on in the next slide. So the women are empty vessels into which the gods inject destruction. And the gods use women far more than they use men to achieve their fate, and to also create that sort of literary interest, I suppose, where women are used to add flavour, add colour, bear the psychological weight of the poem as well. That's the sort of function within the poem of the women. And let's zoom in on this quote. So where do we see this? We've obviously seen it with Dido. She gets her life is destroyed by the intervention of the gods. We see it with book 2 as well, that Creusa obviously gets killed off. She's necessarily got to be killed off, really, for the poem, hasn't she? Because we need Aeneas to be a single man, essentially, not distracted by his wife, not a Hector, and he needs to be sort of single enough for Lavinia to marry him. We also see it with the Sibyl in book 6. If you go back and reread that scene with the Sibyl, it is so filled with almost sexual violence, as Apollo is described as sort of mounting her like a horse and having to dig in the stirrups to try and control her, and she's there she's resisting the bit in her mouth, and it's all done with this sort of horse imagery where Apollo is trying to tame her, and she is very much the sort of sexual victim of Apollo when she gives her prophecy to Aeneas. It's when you look back on it and reread it, it is quite violent, and she is clearly a victim there. We also see it obviously with the martyr. We get first introduced to a martyr in book 7. That's where she gets driven crazy by Alecto. And then obviously that victimhood comes to a climax in book 12 when she ends up killing herself as well. We see it with book 9 with Euryalus' mother. I suppose the gods aren't necessarily involved in that scenario, but we see that the war, and certainly the poem and the founding of the Roman race, this is about the women taking the cost of the founding of the Roman race, and Euryalus' mum certainly pays that price. And then we see obviously Juturna, like I said, she, in exchange for her virginity, Jupiter gave her immortality. That was not a welcome gift, because we see in book 12 she, as a result of her immortality, she has to suffer seeing all of her family die. She has to suffer seeing Turnus die, and she laments that. She laments her immortality, and it's not a nice gift. It's not what she wanted. She would have rather have just not been raped and still be mortal. And so we see lots of examples in which the women are victims of the gods, and they suffer their destruction. Another key quote that we see. So we see this the second function of women, essentially, other than obviously being destruction, women are useful for the empire just to bear their children. And once they've done that, they can go. And we see this, that the male line is the important one. And we see it with that sort of that book 2 image of Aeneas and his father and his son. We see it in book 6 where Aeneas again only follows his father down to the underwater. His mum's also dead. Oh no, his mum's not also dead. But he doesn't see Creusa there, does he? So, and we see Anchises going through Aeneas' line, and he focuses on the men. It's only the men that we talk about here. It's not really the women. So the men are the important ones. The women, their function is to have babies, and we can see this most clearly through, obviously, Creusa from book 2. She has her baby, she's never mentioned again. We see it also with a martyr. She can no longer, she's an old woman. Gross, they're disgusting. What's the value of old women? She cannot influence her family anymore, so she has no influence in who Lavinia marries. And so what is the point of her? We might as well kill her off. We see this with the Trojan women. In book 5, we're told that they are longing for the home. They just want to make a home. We've got this sort of natural, innate urge to make a home, and that is what the women yearn for, and so they burn the ships and they want to be left behind. We also see this with the Latin women. Again, like I said at the start, they are just booted out and kept away, so that they are no longer involved in the storytelling. They're not going to get under anybody's feet. They're shunted aside. Camilla, obviously, she is dedicated to Diana, goddess of virginity. And so what use is she to a man? And what use is she to a poem? What use is she to the Roman race? None at all. If you are not going to be a mother, if you're going to be dedicated to virginity, you're absolutely useless. We might as well kill you off. On the other hand, we see Lavinia. She's given no personality. Why do we need a personality? But in book 6, we are told that Aeneas will have a child with her. That child is Silvius. He will come about after Aeneas has died. But we know that Lavinia will fulfill her womanly duty by giving Aeneas a child. And so she is a tick the best woman, and so she will be the only one that will get to survive. The important part there. And then obviously we see these sort of side characters. Helen, she's uses her sexuality and her lust and her femininity to betray men. And so we see that in book 2, and we're supposed to also make that comparison with Cleopatra. Cleopatra in book 8 when she's on the shield as well. But Cleopatra does not get to survive, of course. I'm going to almost leave you with this quote from Sally Knight that I used in the last video. So the defining quality of women in the Aeneid seems to be their irrationality or their furor and the consequent tendency to upset the male order of things. And we get this constant tension between women and these strong women and the men. And the men, and this is supposed to be the right thing. And Sally Knight actually goes on to say that in book 1, where we see Juno creating the storm, that is representing sort of female disruption, female irrationality. And what does it take for that storm to be calmed? It takes Neptune, a man, to come and restore order. And she says that is a metaphor in the very beginning of the Aeneid, that there is going to be this tension between crazy women and rational men. And we see this sort of represented in how women are talked about. So here are some quotes about women that we get. So, burning with all a woman's passion for spoil and plunder. That's talking about Camilla. Men have passion for spoil and plunder, but here we get the woman's passion. So again, think about how the gender and the emotion are tied together. The queen was seething with womanly anger. I have founded a glorious city. This is Dido. I have avenged my husband and punished his enemy. So this is Dido being excellent, but still we get her compared, sort of defined by saying that she has this womanly anger. Whereas we then get Lavinia, a deep blush kindled their fire and spread over her cheeks. That's all that happens with Lavinia. She blushes this one time. That's it. Mercury in book 4 says, women are unstable creatures, always changing. That's a really nice quote to have in your back pocket for a women essay. Then we get Euryalus' mum. She's crazed with grief. She rushed out and wailing as women do. As women do. Women are the only ones that wail. And tearing at her hair, she made for the front ranks. And then we get Dido again. She raged and raved around the whole city like a bacchant. Again, crazy, crazy bacchants. So think about how women have been portrayed in terms of their emotions and their hysteria. They are there to disrupt the male order of things. Now, if you were to get a women essay, I think it would be something along the lines of this: evaluate the importance of mortal women in Aeneas' journey. So as you're answering or planning this essay, and I suggest you plan it this weekend, consider how do each of the women reflect upon Aeneas' character and his development throughout the poem. So remember that women are just literary devices. They're very rarely fully fledged characters. You can argue against me there, especially with Dido, but their function is to shine a different light on our heroes. They are there with their torches, trying to tell us something about the male hero. That is the focus throughout of this poem. And so as you're thinking about them, consider how does their behavior or their actions or how they are portrayed reflect upon Aeneas, and how does it change his development as well? When you're thinking about the importance of women in Aeneas' journey, consider the sort of contrast there. Are they a help or are they a hindrance to him? Do they further his journey or do they hinder it? And if they do hinder it, somebody like Dido perhaps you could say delays him, but I would argue develops his character and allows his pietas to shine through, because he, despite the fact that he loves her and she's very, very sexy, he still would choose the Roman Empire over her. And so that's how I would consider to answer these questions. Good luck. Fingers crossed for you. Goodbye.